He's been called the most dangerous philosopher in the West, and in his new book, Refugees, Terror and Other Troubles with the Neighbours, Slavoj Žižek calls for a defence of the European Enlightenment project and rails against the romanticisation of refugees. So I began by asking why he thinks refugees pose such a threat to so-called European values.
First, I was very specific what I mean by European Enlightenment project. And let me draw my attention to what I also say in this book.
This is your new book, yeah.
The greatest threat to Europe today are not the refugees. The greatest threat are precisely the fake right-wing populist defenders of Europe. For me, a true threat to Europe is people like Nigel Farage, Marine Le Pen, Pegida in Germany come to power.
You say refugees come from a culture that is incompatible with Western European notions of human rights.
I wonder if I said this precisely.
You said it precisely on page 107 of your book.
What do I say?
You say refugees come from a culture that is incompatible with Western European notions of human rights.
Yeah, but a couple of pages later or before,
Okay.
I don't know where, I also say that I'm well aware that European notion of human rights is not above in the air universal one.
So why make such a big play out of refugees threatening it then?
I explicitly, brutally, that's the whole first third of the book, emphasize that refugees are, to a large extent, mainly responsibility of European geopolitical gains played there in Libya, in the Middle East, of new economic forms of neocolonialism, and so on and so on. So we, but not only we, also United States and other countries, we cannot play the game of, a catastrophe happened there, now we have a purely humanitarian problem. That I make it clear.
So that is fairly uncontroversial position. And then you move on to the controversial position, which is?
Okay, that's I explicitly say in the book. I want even more refugees. I only want rules to be clearly established, not the rules in the sense of refugees have to pass the test of fitting the West and so on and so on. But okay, I will give you a vulgar example. Don't tell me it's a marginal one. I mentioned in the book, it happens over, I was so told, by leftist reports, over 2,000 times per year in Germany. You have, all my respect to them, a Muslim family of refugees in Germany.
What happens 2,000 times a year?
I will immediately, very briefly go to it. Their girl gets seduced by Western style of life, wants to live with a Western boyfriend. There is a pressure on the family from her. The girls get desperate. That's what happened over 2,000 times. She seeks refugee with the police. And then the problem is real. What would you have done in this case? If the police protects her, in a way they are totally justified. Her family will say, oh, you're not allowing our way of life.
No one is disputing that there are problems within either refugee communities, minority communities. The problem is generalizing on that basis. The problem is saying that we should change our attitudes or our opinions about refugees as a whole.
No.
Simply on the basis of some minority practices.
No, but you underestimate this. My point is this.
Maybe you overestimate it.
No, I'm not saying this is the big problem and so on. I mean, big in the sense of majority.
But you do suggest that there are liberal European values that, for example, Muslim refugees from Muslim majority countries don't sign up to. Is that fair?
But why is this something problematic? Didn't it show with all those
it's problematic
Islam
because you're assuming that there is a monolithic unified group of Muslims and a monolithic unified group of Europeans non-Muslims when there aren't. You know, refugees have different views.
This is too simple to
Europeans
say,
have different.
What I think we shouldn't be afraid of doing is saying, okay, where should a Western state set a limit?
Yeah.
What would you?
And I'm asking what your limit is. You're not telling me.
Very broad.
If it's very broad, then what's the problem? Everyone should get along. I'm confused. Where are the limits that Western European countries or European countries should set that refugees violate in some way in your head? You're not telling me.
I gave you now one example.
One example.
Which is the way we understand individual human rights with all our falsities and so on.
But look at Europe, Slavoj. You know better than me how diverse Europeans are. I mean, the British view of gay marriage is very different to the Polish view of gay marriage. The Hungarian view of Jews...
That's why Polish people should also be censored. I don't have any problem with
the Hungarian view of Jews is very different to the Swedish view of Jews.
I absolutely agree.
The French view of secularism is very different to the Irish view of secularism. So why are you assuming that there is one European view which these foreign refugees aren't signing up to?
I'm not saying, wait a minute, now you're imputing to
you
me
are, your words in the book.
Europe is a unified Europe and so on.
You suggest that in your book. You say basically they expect to get the best of the Western welfare state while retaining their specific way of life.
I think that in spite of all the differences and so on, there is some minimum of Western notion of human rights, freedoms, equality, and so on.
I'm asking what that minimum is that refugees don't meet. You haven't told me yet.
No notions of personal freedom, freedom of choice. Of course, Europe is torn in between. And I'm precisely, my true enemies, as it's clear there, are precisely those that you just enumerated.
You say that the far right, you say that they're your true enemies, and then you say stuff like, page 6 of this book,
yeah.
We are definitely in the midst of the clash of civilizations, Christian West versus radicalized Islam. How is that not the rhetoric of the far right?
My answer to clash of civilization is there is a clash within each civilization. There is obvious clash in Europe between...
So then why talk of a discredited clash of civilizations?
Because it appears in the media as such, but I undermine
because you're trying to be provocative.
No.
Isn't that the case?
No.
Clash of civilizations, I think, is universally seen as a pretty
but again, my
statement.
God, I said there, the true clash is within each civilization.
All I'm saying is, do you accept that Marine Le Pen could also say the words, we are definitely in the midst of the clash of civilizations, Christian West versus radicalized Islam? You can imagine her saying that.
Yeah, but she would never add, which is for me part of the same logic, that
there's a clash
the solution of this to this problem is to emphasize the clash within each civilization. And I'm well aware of this. I was, my God, in Ramallah. I know the big clash now on the West Bank. My friends, some Palestinian punkers who attack honor killings there. My dream is to bring together the struggles.
You say bring together the struggles. In your book, page 103, you suggest that immigrants, especially refugees, prey on European women because, quote, that what they are doing is foreign to our predominant culture. They are doing it precisely to wound our sensitivities to our predominant culture. They are doing it precisely to wound our sensitivities. How is that not a statement that couldn't come out of the mouth of Marine Le Pen, of the Golden Dawn, of all sorts of horrible groups?
Wait a minute.
Immigrants as a whole are trying to wound European sensitivities?
Not immigrants, those who did there. I spoke about
the Cologne attack.
Cologne attack.
Okay.
And I spoke with people from there. I spoke when I was in
So you took an attack and generalized to make a generalized point about European culture. How is that not bigotry, to take one incident and generalize about people? How is that not what the far right does? Wait a minute.
It was absolutely not a sexual attack in the sense of rapes and so on and so on. It was a kind of a provocation, if I may use the word that you use.
The attackers were provoking who? European culture. Seriously. A bunch of drunk thugs.
My Arab friends told me that what happened in Cologne was also happening on Tahrir Square in Egypt. It happens regularly.
And what do you extrapolate from that?
Nothing.
What's your conclusion? Nothing?
Some kind
but
of
it also happens in Germany at the Oktoberfest beer festival in Munich. It happens at Mardi Gras. It's not. Why is it not the same? Women get attacked in public places all over the world. Why are you racializing it? Why are you culturalizing it?
No, I think you are here absolutely simplifying things.
You are. Sorry, Slavoj. You just said to me it happens in Tahrir Square and it happens in Cologne. What happens? What is the lesson from Cologne and Tahrir Square that you are making, that you think is worth making?
The lesson that is worth making is that we should talk openly about all these problems and not try to whitewash them and so on and so on.
Okay. One final question. Isn't it quite navel-gazing, some might say parochial, given the vast majority of the world's refugees are not in Europe? They're in the Middle East, they're in Africa, they're in the poorest corners of the world. Shouldn't that be the focus of our concerns, rather than spurious concerns about European culture being undermined?
And now I will really attack back.
Okay.
Yes, I agree. And what about countries like Saudi Arabia, Qatar, and so on? They accept practically zero
points
refugees.
I made to the Qatari foreign minister on this show. Outrageous.
That's a little bit too easy to say, because nobody speaks.
But Turkey, Jordan, Lebanon, hosting millions of refugees. And here we have European politicians and European intellectuals getting very excited about 10,000 refugees, when the poorest countries in the world are hosting millions of refugees in Pakistan, in Jordan.
The first of my problems is this one. Why did this even become a crisis of Europe? Why Europe?
Yes, why?
There are so many other countries. Why don't refugees go just down to Saudi Arabia and Qatar and Emirates? Why Europe?
But why pick on 3 Gulf states only when there's plenty of Middle East states?
Because they're much richer than
Europe. I agree. They should take more refugees. I'm asking you about Europe's refugee crisis. You wrote a book about Europe, and I'm saying, why shouldn't Europe share the burden, the richest continent in the world? Why should it not share the burden of refugees?
Where is the problem here?
You just said a few minutes ago, why do they all come to Europe? You said it, Slavoj, 2 minutes ago.
But like together with others. In the same way that
Exactly,
rich Arab
and the Europeans are
countries,
not sharing the burden.
They
of the
are. I'm sorry.
No, sorry.
West Germany accepted over 1 million.
Germany, yes, but not the rest of it. Syrian refugees make up less than 0.1% of the EU population. In Lebanon, they make up 20% of the population. So please don't say that they are sharing the burden. Mathematically, that is not true.
Well, inviting 1 million people to a country who is not close to the region of crisis is quite is something.
Well, it's never close to the region of crisis. We'll have to leave it there. Slavoj Žižek, thank you for coming on Up Front and talking about your book. That's our show. Up Front will be back next week.